So, good afternoon. I want to introduce my friend Bradford, who we've been kind of banging around here for a couple of years together with some startup ventures. And I'll let him give you a little bit of background. But welcome to the Cofolio vlog. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Rich. Excited to be here and talking with you and talk about what my experience within the startup world. So, a little bit about me. I've been involved with tech startups, since 2014. So, going on 8 years now. All really early stages, from nascent to just kind of beginning to crest into that growth stage. Held a number of different positions and kind of really cross-functional. So marketing, customer success, certainly have had input in product, sales, business development, and finance as well. So it's seen quite a bit, and know definitely the challenges that are presented that early on.
It's kind of addictive, isn't it, when you get started with these small companies?
It's a bug. You have to be wired very specifically. You have to be a builder. When I'm talking to people about it, I always say, or if I'm interviewing people, it's like, do they have startup blood? Um, the mantra that I keep in mind is a startup is always about you're earning the right to solve the next problem because there's always another one in front of you. There's never a perfect solution, and it just really never stops. Which, yes, can be addicting, but you have to be a very specific type of person that wants to take on all those challenges.
Yeah, and all the risk that goes with that too, right? I mean, because the instability that comes with the nature of being part of startups.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You have to surround yourself with people who are willing to take those risks with you.
Right. And so some of the companies and you specifically have been involved in a lot of SaaS organizations, correct? Both education based and non-education based.
That's right. Yeah. So mostly education based for sure, but also within very early on in my career, actually an internship in video games as well.
Well, that's a cool background. We'll have to explore that on another vlog. So, in regards to some of these ed tech startups, and I know that you've worked at, like you said, in varying positions, and working directly with management groups or CEOs. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you've seen from your perspective, because I think this is interesting. We've interviewed a lot of people who have been founders and started businesses, but when you have someone who's a key personnel in a role, you have a very different perspective, which I think is going to be fascinating. So let's delve into some of the challenges that you see from your side of it, when you're in your perspective as you have that lens turned on that CEO and some of the challenges that they have coming at them. From a technology standpoint, I want to start off broad and then we can get more narrow. Why don't you give me some perspective on what you see are some of the major challenges that these founders are facing?
So I think one thing is always when it's really early on, it's being able to communicate the vision. And I think we do, and I have certainly observed that the founders are going to be visionary people, right? And they have a big idea. One, they need to be able to concisely convince people or talk about it. It's not necessarily about convincing yet. It's just about sharing the idea in a concise manner. Some challenges that you might have is they see it from all angles, but you have to be able to communicate it in small bites. So one of the roles that I've always tried to play is first to listen, and then figure out what are the pieces, how do we put that into a framework, and how do we communicate that in a way that tells a story and tells a narrative. When you're thinking that big, it does get hard to boil it down to some key points. And of course, with a startup and with a startup team, you need people that can do both. And so I think that's definitely one of the challenges that is faced. In addition, it's figuring out and distilling those big ideas into a core strategy, and then filling in all the details. I think we think about strategy and tactics, but it's not one or the other. It's a spectrum, right? And there's layers of each, right? So the strategy it plays into your marketing and your messaging, and then who is your demographic, what channels are you on, and then really getting on into the nitty-gritty details. And I think, again, when you're working with a founder that is visionary, it is sometimes hard for them to get all the way and take it all the way to those nitty-gritty details of your go-to-market and your more tactical execution. Certainly one of the challenges that I've observed. From a technical standpoint, it's the same thing. It's translating that vision. They have something in their mind. They can see it. The technology doesn't always want to agree. Certainly at the beginning, when you're just starting out the iterative process, right? It's like you want to bring this big bell tower, and you want it to resonate. But in the end, you get like this two spoons clinking together, and that's your beta. And I think it's accepting that and being able to work through, again, earning the right to solve the next problem. And you'll see that in the iterative process. So I think that's one of the challenges. Is technology can do a lot, but it doesn't do a lot immediately. I think there's this unfair vision of these overnight successes. Often, by the time you're hearing about them in Forbes or EdSurge or whatever the industry trade publication is, they've been around for 10 years already working at it and taking those risks and earning the right to solve the next problem, to get to scale and to get to grow.
Yeah, the overnight success mantra is not necessarily. I think it's overblown, and like you said, it's usually a lot more time that went into it in order to get to that level of proficiency than people realize, and that takes a lot of perseverance, right? And a lot of minor and sometimes major pivots along the way, because you were talking about strategy and how they intertwine with the tactics of the business. And as they start to come together, often we see these amazing little nuances that need to be adjusted, right? It's like all these little levers that you have to continually press. And hopefully you get the right combination that gets the investors happy, the customers happy, the staff and the crew happy with what you're delivering, and it all starts to come together.
Yep.
Having managed people throughout your time too, is it hard to build that alignment, between what you see that the founder's looking for in the company and what the staff wants to deliver or do? Is that a challenging position?
It definitely is. I think it's funny. Communication is one of our core adaptations, right? Our ability to communicate has helped us become the species that we are. But it's something that we get wrong so often. And I think there's some ideas about some people will over communicate, right? But what is over communicate? That's it's overcompensation. It's not the right level. You want to communicate in the right amount, but it does take grooming. It does take constant touch points, and it is always changing. And I think talk about another startup fallacy is, I think, the idea of a nimble organization. I think you can be a nimble organization that is big, and you can be a nimble organization that is small. You can also be completely clumsy, small, or large. And I think it does come down to having the proper communication channels set up, the proper messaging. It is a marketing issue. It just happens to be internal. A brand represents one thing, right?
Right.
And your message internally has to be the same, right? And then you fill in some core values around that, and you have to live them and breathe them. And you have to continue to get buy-in again and again, especially when you're working with young people. And I would also say, similar to how a founder will be diluted through equity investment, is they have to be willing to have their vision be diluted, but really actually colored in and filled in by the people that are joining them on the journey. Because like I said, these people are builders too. They have startup blood and they want to build something.
So that's a great point. So we take that and say, now if you as a top line guy are delivering something that represents your team to the founder, whether it be KPIs or messaging, how is that done, and what are some of the core things that you would deliver that are meaningful to the founder?
Yeah. So interesting question. I think, say when you're managing up, right? Just as when you're managing down, you have to know what everybody's core goal is. So I'll bring it to, I'll actually answer beginning with the people you're managing, the people underneath, right? Ultimately, they want to be developed. They want to develop their careers. They want to know why this is good for them and good for their own mission, right? So one of the first things I always do when I'm managing people is, where do you want your career to go? Whether it's here, whether it's elsewhere, what skills do you want, right? Similarly, if you understand what the founder's vision is, what's truly motivating them, the mission that they have, the reason why they came to the idea of the product, you just have to connect it to that, right? Which I say but it can be complicated, and ultimately, they want to know why these ideas are going to be good for the direction of their business. So, it could be, look, we want to develop this person more. Let's let them run with them. They've shown that they have talent in this. We want to bring their ideas, and we want to, again, encourage them to grow within their role and add on to the company, right? So, and in the end, showing how it's aligned to strategic frameworks that the visionary CEO has laid out.
Okay, that's fascinating. One of the things that we talk about at Cofolio is empowering entrepreneurs. It comes from all different sides, whether it's from the CFO or the CMO. And what we're trying to disseminate to understand better is what are those key things that CMO needs or that CEO needs to make decisions around the company. We have some basic assumptions, but I think it's really important to hear specifically what communication points are going to resonate, are going to be meaningful to drive the company forward. And one of the things I heard you say is if the vision that's being cast externally is different than the vision being cast internally, then you're going to have these conflicts that occur. It's not going to jive, and that friction will cause disruption. Is that accurate?
Yeah, wherever there is misalignment, there's going to be cause for concern, right? And so I think you do have to have a consistent message. But at the same time, I do think there's different elements of what you're communicating externally and what you're communicating internally, and different stakeholders. It all does come down to who the stakeholders are, who the audience is, but it does need to come down to some sort of core element, right? Yeah. So externally, the message is going to be, what is the value to the core customer, right? And what is the impact that is made from this? Internally, you come back to that mission and that essence and what the impact you want to make, and you have to tell everybody, this is the model for how we grow, and this is how you plug into that, and this is your role within that. And if we work together, we're all moving in the same direction, which is, moving in the same direction is a nimble company, moving in different directions is a clumsy company, right? And so it does have to tie back to the core mission. Of course, you're tweaking the messaging for a particular audience.
I think based on this conversation and others that we've had, is you're very much a brand guy like I am. Brand is important. That message that's going out has to resonate with your core audience, and building it towards a persona. So, when you look at their personas, how do you translate that across the organization so everybody knows who it is that you're speaking to and you're trying to target? Is there kind of like a software you're using, or is there a way you translate that?
Yeah, I think you build who the person is, right? If you're in marketing, you're talking about that archetype. You're giving the end user a name. You're talking about how many cats they have, or their age and what their goals are. Getting into the psychographics and telling their story, right? I think part of it is certainly empathy is really, really important. I'm not an actor, but I can imagine that there's parallels there when you're thinking about method acting. You're getting into the head of the character you want to play. It's the same thing for marketing. And then you draw from that. Where are they going to go to find information? Who are they going to confide in? What are their motivations again, right? You're talking about customer motivations. You're talking about employee motivations. What's driving the decisions that they're making, particularly around your category of product. And I think if you allow yourself to first try to tell their story, it actually becomes surprisingly easy to get in their head and at least come up with a hypothesis that you can test. But at least that prevents you from putting a scattershot out there into the ether without really knowing what you want to get out of it.
That's a great point, and I love the word hypothesis, and I don't hear it very often in terms of startups. But one of the consultants that I worked with, who was an old line Deloitte and Touche guy, and he's probably in his early 80s at this point, but this guy's one of the most brilliant people I've ever worked with, and he always started everything with a hypothesis. He said, okay, let's start here, and then our effort and our work is to disprove that hypothesis, and it moves. And if you don't have that as a starting point, like you said, it becomes very scattershot. You don't have any focus. So I love the fact that you use that phraseology.
And you're actually educating me a little bit. I haven't thought about the scientific method beyond the word hypothesis in a while, but the goal is to disprove. The goal is to be wrong,
yeah.
Right? And that's important in the startup world, is the willingness to get it wrong and then, test, measure, improve.
Yeah, I think it's get to fail as quickly as you possibly can, and then you move and you keep evolving. Otherwise, if you always think that you're going to be right on every decision, you're most likely not going to be, and you're off target, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about technology. What kind of technologies are you using today? Now, I know one of your main roles is on the customer service and sales side. What are you seeing as the prevalent technologies that are out there for CRM and for in the marketing stack today?
Yeah. So right now, in terms of marketing automation, using ActiveCampaign in terms of CRM and sales management, it's Salesforce, which becoming more and more familiar with. But there's a lot in there to unpack.
Yeah, Salesforce is a pretty robust product, isn't it?
Yeah. There's a lot in there, and I think it actually in some ways can be difficult for a small company to use. Like I think it's interesting that there's a great position out there is to be a Salesforce administrator, right?
Yeah.
And I think when you're a smaller company, you don't have anyone. You're not looking for someone with that specific of a skill set. So there's a lot in there. I think you use it the best you can. And with any of those sorts of platforms, it's all about it's the same thing. It's the iterative process. Let's get it started. Let's fail at it, and let's improve as we go. That's it. I think the dashboarding on Salesforce is really nice. Certainly having one source of truth for your data is important. This might not resonate with everybody, but it's almost like it's not necessarily the decision of the platform you make. It's about the making a decision and sticking with one and improving at it over time.
I agree with that because you have so many good products out there. I mean, whether you're Salesforce, your HubSpot, your Zoho, there's a lot of things that can go into your decision making and to your tech stack. But if you're not consistent with it, you're not going to get to the true numbers, and you're always going to flounder. And true numbers are really critical, right? I think about some of the KPIs that we talk about, cost of acquisition, number of leads that are at the top of the funnel versus qualified leads versus those that are ready for sale, et cetera. What are things that you guys are tracking?
Yeah, so I mean, it goes from the very top of the funnel, right? You want to know about your email campaigns, of course, what the open rate is, what the click-through rate is. Putting out lead magnets are incredibly important. I think leads generated are going to be the key marketing metric. All the way down the funnel. I mean, it's all important. It all tells you different things, right? The open rate tells you about the subject line. The click-through rate tells you about the content. The download rate of the lead magnets tells you it's like, okay, this actually seems compelling to the audience. It doesn't really give you more than one little tidbit, and then you really it needs to come down to, okay, so now you have the lead, but how many of those leads are converting, right, and closing? You want to be able to see the full funnel, every metric where you possibly can. Instrumenting the funnel is difficult and challenging, but again, to go back to the iterative process, you have to start somewhere and start building, and over time, whether it takes 5 or 10 years, you get there and you start to see it. But yeah, it just comes down to instrumenting your funnel and looking at it. And there's different A/B tests are really nice. They're simple and elegant in that way, right? So trying to do that. What else? I'm not sure what else we should be looking for other than just like from email, top of funnel, all the way through close. You need to be able to see it all. Of course, that is challenging. You got to start somewhere.
I have one of these entrepreneurs that I spoke with on this series, and if you go back and you watch, you'll see he's in the research business, and he said there's different things he tracks, but he goes, the only one thing that really matters, and that's my total sales per employee. He goes, that's how I know my company is either on target or not, but that's a very service-based enterprise, and that's full-time employee. So he specified full-time employee because they have call centers, probably has 40 or 50 people, but only 12 of which are full-time, and so he knows that he needs to reach a certain volume, and then he has grown steadily 15% a year every single year for 15 years or something.
That's a cornerstone of Jim Collins' Good to Great, is figure out what is that absolute core metric that drives your business. I think there are, of course, challenges in figuring out precisely what that is, but that's a great example that you just gave.
Yeah, and I think that every business has to figure those things out. And when it comes to core metrics, you talked about empirical resource, and one of the things that we're trying to do with Cofolio and we see out there is, if you're dealing with Salesforce and you have your CMO or somebody sending you reports each week, and you have your QuickBooks data or whatever resource from finance, and then you have something coming in from product. You have these things, and maybe the reports look different, maybe they come in at different times. That's really challenging to make decisions. And so we're giving that entrepreneur dashboard, or I call it a cockpit, because I think that's a good analogy. If I'm sitting in a fighter jet, everything's right there, and I see my gauges, and I can program which ones I want to see that are going to make a difference to me. So if we can pipe in all that information via APIs, and it can be automated, I think that's going to make a real difference for those entrepreneurs, so that they can better run the company.
Absolutely. I know being able to see your complete funnel, it's on so many different channels, right? It's on each social media, has its own metrics. Google Analytics is nice to try to pull it all together, but it's not necessarily capturing your sales. It's really just capturing your website data. You end up needing to stitch it all together. You have these individual dashboards. It's not a cockpit. I love that. But it always seems to end up back in an Excel sheet somehow, right?
Right.
Which defeats the purpose in the end.
Exactly. It really does. It's crazy, but I think we're creatures of habit. That ultimately that's going to be well, at least if I see it on that one sheet of paper. But if I have it on one screen, it should be as effective, if not more effective. In your experience, having worked with a lot of different startups over the years, have you been involved or watched different either acquisition or fundraising efforts during your time? I would imagine you had, right?
Yeah, certainly touched. Don't consider myself an expert, but I've observed and dabbled. Yeah.
Well, okay. So during that time, what kind of questions or things did you have to help provide, or what kind of energy did you see in the company? Did you see a shift in energy from like normal operating days to fundraising? Oh my God, my hair's going to fall out days.
Oh yeah. Question you on what is a normal operating day? I don't know that exists at a startup. Money and financing everything can very much eat up the cognitive load of a company pretty quickly, right? It's nerve-wracking, right? Because you think of investors who they are smart, right? They're smart people. You think of, oh my God, I need to impress them in every way, and everything needs to be right, and I have to have an answer for absolutely everything. And you probably should, and you do need to get the numbers right, but it does certainly create a scramble, or at least feel that way. Getting the data rooms together, cobbling all that, I think we all like to think that we'd have that all set and tidy from day one, but we all know how prioritization works. And to get anything done, you have to prioritize, and sometimes until getting all that data in order is a priority, it's not. And then you need to get it there. So there's a lot of stress behind getting those data rooms together, looking for the right version, making sure you have everything, and understand the story to tell about it too, all at the same time. You do see a difference in the what people are experiencing in those times.
My mom used to have a saying, when we would get in trouble, she would say, the best laid intentions. If we had an excuse, but this is what I want to do, Mom. Well, the best laid intentions, and I think that's true when you start up a business. Like you said, you think you're going to organize things and you plan to, but then you get into the meat of it, and it becomes so overwhelming. It's hard to keep up with those routine or mundane tasks. And so, certainly versioning, uh, organizing critical documents, taking that out of the entrepreneur's hands and saying, we can automate that stuff. You put it in once, and then it's going to automate setting up the right templates, even to NDAs. We're going to within the system have the ability to on your phone have an NDA available. So you're sitting at a lunch meeting, you can present it, person can sign it, it automatically gets filed. You never have to think about it again. You don't have to call your administrative assistant. It's just done. Little things like that I think really can throw you off. I know I've been thrown off by it. Just oh geez, I got to dig through my computer. I've got to have that printed out for the meeting. Come back, file it someplace, and there's a half hour of my time just wasted.
Yeah, for sure. I think sometimes when you're navigating an entire organization, even if it's a small one like a startup, you need a treasure map to get through Google Drive sometimes. So anything that would keep it kind of collated, version controlled would definitely save a lot of time.
Yeah, no doubt. So, I think that one day, this is my hypothesis, is Bradford Stein is going to be an entrepreneur himself. He's going to start up a business. How close to accurate is that?
Oh, the statement is 100% true. It's just a matter of time and having the right idea, and I think the life context to go after it. I've always been fascinated with entrepreneurship, and in some regard, almost looked at it as like it is a form of self-expression, right? Just like art is. And of course, it needs to be commercially viable. It can't just be an idea that you like. But to kind of fold your interests and get people behind it, and be the driving force behind something has always been something that's been exciting to me. So just, looking for the right idea.
Yeah, and what's a problem that I can solve, and then that can be commercially viable. And that's a good thing that you've been involved in these enterprises. You see when it's a miss, or that when it may not be perfectly aligned, and you'll have that experience to draw upon to make better decisions as you go forward.
Yeah. But as you say, best laid intentions, right? It's being aware of those pitfalls, but at the same time not falling right back into them yourself as things start to pick up, and as you have to prioritize and figure out what exactly you want to do each day at the time when there's so many things to choose from.
Yeah, it's funny. My wife always she always thinks that I should have opened up a restaurant. I love to cook. I guess I'm pretty good at it. I probably make 5 out of 7 meals a week here at the house, and I don't mind doing it. I love cooking, coming up with new things. I make a lot of great soups and so forth. And I've also worked in the restaurant business. I bartended. I had a wholesale meat company at one point. I know the restaurant business pretty intimately. And I said, there's absolutely no way I will ever start up a restaurant, because I've seen it. And I know that most of those people are just absolutely strung out, that it's such an arduous, difficult thing to do. It's a 24/7 proposition that just doesn't leave you, because even if you walk away from the restaurant for a day, you're getting the phone calls and you have to go back into it. And it's not only physically exhausting, it's mentally exhausting. So, I think that sometimes we can see through the forest through the trees. That it's not the right thing, but there's plenty of other ways to channel that energy, that creative outlet. And for me, it's been entrepreneurism in SaaS, and it sounds like for you, it's probably the same thing.
Yeah, actually, always thought about when I go back to think about when I first wanted to become an entrepreneur and have set my mark, it was on like a local restaurant. Um, watch a ton of cooking shows, do a lot of cooking myself, and know enough that the restaurant business, one, there's a high failure. You get the high failure rate, and also like you have to be on premise all the time, so it's hard to be difficult on your family. So I actually recently was like, no, not going in that direction. I'm going into something that, I can use the tool that's in front of me, the computer, and the internet, and go from there. There's a lot to chew on there. So
Yeah. And you can go out to good restaurants anytime and enjoy a nice meal.
yeah, bring the computer. So yeah.
Um, well, it's I think it's an exciting time for a few reasons. One is the technology has advanced so far that we have APIs. We can bring in a lot of data. We have these stackable technologies in every facet of the business. There are certainly lots of problems to be solved out there today utilizing technology. What gets you jazzed? I mean, when you look forward into the future, what do you see out there that's like you think is super cool?
Well, I do think well, I have been in education for a long time, right? And I think some of the trends that are beginning there, there's a lot of opportunities to improve the education system. So I am on a daily basis excited about the work that I do. I think the automation trend is one thing, and I don't think we ever want to completely automate education, right? Like, let's just forget that idea. But what we've seen, certainly forced into the pandemic, is the ability to pull in people from all over the world and the willingness to do that. And I think the connections that we can make, the ability to be more global in our mindset and within education is really, really exciting. I think the key there for me is that we don't totally jump into a digital universe and metaverse, is that we still maintain our humanity and that human connection, but that we allow ourselves to amplify it from the communication tools, enhance human empathy through AI, for curated education experiences that curated and individualized. I think is all really exciting, and there's a lot there. Again, the key for me is making sure that it's linked to human connection.
Bradford, that's such a profound thought, and I agree 100%. When jumping into the metaverse and dehumanizing things, people may think it's more perfect, but I think certainly there's a lot of flaws with that. While humanity can tend to be a little cynical, when you find the good side, there's so much potential, and to keeping that empathetic view of things and understanding where the other person's coming from, I agree is really the key to the success, because it's one of the hardest things to do. We shouldn't ignore it. So yeah, it's a great view.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us today on this. Kind of we're kicking off this whole series. We've done a few interviews, but we're just kind of getting rolling. I plan on doing a lot, and we would love to have another conversation in the near future if you're available.
Of course, no, this was fun. I'd love to follow up in the future and see how things are going at Portfolio, and continue just talking about entrepreneurial world and that experience that some of us share.
Awesome. And we wish you a lot of luck as you start to, kind of go out there and the things that you're doing and the things that you're going to do one day. We know they're going to be great.
Awesome. Thank
All
you,
right,
Rich.
Bradford. Thank you. Talk to you soon, man.